Good evening, everyone. I'm Carolyn Heller, Director of Finance and Administration here at Stanford Biocenter for Biodesign. We're thrilled to welcome everyone, both in person and online, to this from the Innovator's Workbench speaker series that was launched over 20 years ago to showcase meaningful and impactful innovators, their important work, and their unique perspectives on healthcare, health technology innovation, and leadership in our dynamic field. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this event, Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati. We're appreciative of their continued support. Also, a huge thank you to Annette Awanich for her organization of this event, along with our awesome Biodesign team. We are recording this event and ask everyone to please silence their cell phones. Immediately after the event, we're hosting a reception in the Biodesign space, and we hope you will stay and join us just across the courtyard. It's my pleasure to introduce two truly wonderful individuals who have had a significant and indelible impact on Stanford Biodesign. First, Kate Garrett, who will have the honor of introducing our featured guest. Kate is a managing partner at Sonder Capital and assistant director of the Stanford Biodesign Innovation Fellowship. Prior to Sonder Capital, she was CEO of CL Medical, which she co-founded out of the Stanford Biodesign Innovation Fellowship. Seal was acquired by Vyaire Medical in 2017. Kate has co-authored a dozen patents and has received multiple honorary fellowships, including the Farallon Fellowship, which will be talked about tonight. She serves on a number of boards and is a member of the Caltech Seed Fund Investment Advisory Committee. I'd also like to introduce our moderator this evening, Lynn Denon. Lynn is our amazing director of academic programs. She is also a lecturer in the Stanford School of Medicine. In her biodesign role, she teaches numerous courses and leads curriculum development and program execution across Stanford Biodesign's portfolio of educational offerings. Lynn spearheaded Stanford Biodesign's efforts to codify its core innovation process, is the principal author of the textbook Biodesign, the Process of Innovating Medical Technologies, and led the development of our most recent teaching materials, the online student guide to Biodesign. You are all in for a treat this evening as we have a great program lined up. And with that, I will hand it over to Kate Garrett.
Good evening. It is my great pleasure to introduce Angela Macfarlane this evening for two reasons. First, as a mentor, Angela has changed my life and made a significant impact on my professional career. And secondly, because the first time I ever saw her was speaking on a panel just like this evening. And for those of you in the audience that are meeting Angela for the first time, just to forewarn you, prepare for greatness. So let us start with Angela's CV. Angela currently serves as CEO of Perceive Biotherapeutics, developing two novel protective therapeutics to treat retinal blindness. In December, she closed a $78 million Series B financing. Angela founded ForSight Labs in 2005 with Dr. Eugene Dewan and the Foundry to focus on innovation in ophthalmology. ForSight has started 8 companies in both therapeutics and medical devices, 4 of which have been acquired, 3 that were licensed or entered strategic partnerships, and 1 that is privately held. In addition to being a founder and managing partner of ForSight Labs, Angela served as CEO of ForSight Vision 4, ForSight Vision 5, both at the founding and at the time of acquisition. Previously, Angela served as technology counsel to the Foundry and Dr. Tom Fogarty, where she participated in the formation and development of 9 companies across therapeutic areas. She served on the senior management teams at Transvascular, acquired by Medtronic, Anurex, also acquired by Medtronic, and Vitamed, which was taken public. She currently serves on the board of directors for multiple private, public, and nonprofit organizations, and is a co-founder of the Farallon Powell Leadership Program, where she is passionate about advancing the authentic leadership imperative through the practice of high-impact, lifelong mentorship that changes lives. Angela is an inventor on 25 U.S.-issued patents and received her bachelor's in business administration from San Francisco State University and her JD from Golden Gate University of Law. This is an impressive list of accomplishments by any standard. But what this CV is missing is a glimpse into the leadership style that Angela embodies and has allowed her to impact not just dozens of companies, but hundreds of colleagues and mentees along the way. For that, I reached out to several people who have had the opportunity to work with her to share their perspective on what makes Angela so special. Quote, Angela mentors with a deep empathy that creates space for you to take risks, make mistakes, and learn from them. Her guidance is contextually relevant, useful, and maybe most important, delivered with warmth and encouragement. From Reedy Tarial, CEO of NextGen Jane. Quote, Angela came to work for me as my IP attorney and ended up being so much more. She was good at whatever she chose to do, and her straightforwardness was her best attribute. She was a great judge of character. She kept me in order and out of jail. Thank you, Dr. Tom Fogarty. Angela is an exceptional mentor who exemplifies a unique blend of both expertise and empathy. But what really sets her apart is rooted in human connection. She makes space to understand you, to empower you to think critically about your strengths and how those characteristics can drive you towards your goals. Shreya Mehta, CTO of ZenFlow and Biodesign alumna. And last, from Alan Will, serial entrepreneur and CEO, Angela cares deeply about her people, her companies, and her patients. She leads from her heart, and that is why she is so special. As we head into the evening's event, Angela has requested that this be as interactive as possible. We will be leaving extra time for questions at the end, so please don't be shy, and your participation in the Q&A is strongly encouraged. Thank you. Lynn?
All right, so who's excited about this? It's hard to know where to go with that, except to say that we are in for a real treat tonight. And I just wanted to say, Angela, what a privilege it is for me to get to do this interview with you. We have not known each other well for a long time, but I very clearly remember the first time that I met you. Paul Yock had invited you to be a panelist on a Shark Tank type judging panel for a group of Stanford medicine leaders. And they had done an accelerated biodesign workshop, and you were commenting on, sort of their projects along with several other panelists. And I just remember sitting back and I was awestruck by the sense of humor, the quick-wittedness, and the candor that you brought to that interaction. And I just thought, wow, it was something else to see you in action. And I have had the opportunity to watch you and learn from you in a few instances since, and it's a real treat. So you guys are all in for a treat tonight.
Thank you, Lynn.
And let's just dive in. So Kate just gave a brief but fantastic overview of your background. But from what I understand, when you meet people, and particularly when you're doing interviews, you are known for sort of saying, I've read your resume, so we're not going to go over that. What I want to know first is, tell me who you are and what has shaped you. And that seems like the perfect place to start. Angela, tell us who you are and what has shaped you.
Touche, Lynn. Maybe turn this down a bit. Touche. That is where I go. So I'm really delighted to be here. It's a real honor. I think, what would kind of, say shaped me was that, are you going to turn it down a bit? Yeah. I do have a boomer of a voice, people say, so you don't have to turn up the volume. Is that I think I was shaped a lot from creating a path for myself when a path is not there. And I think that can take you into couple of different directions. It can lead you to being creative, but also feeling a little bit like an outsider. Very early on in school, I didn't learn the way other kids learn. I definitely felt that I couldn't understand the material. I ended up realizing I was transposing and, likely, not able to kind of take in the multiple choice tests, not thinking like other kids. And I really worked hard to overcome this and say, I was like everybody else, but I knew very early on that I wasn't. I felt that, this undiagnosed dyslexia was something that just wasn't really talked about or or really taken on in the public schools. And to me, I think when I look back, that really shaped me into kind of creating a world where I could really make things, that I could understand my process and I could look at things differently. I felt sometimes like I was able to take things in all at once, but I was not able to linearize them and respond to them. And so, I always felt like I was insightful, but I never felt smart. I think that's how I describe it. And I think I had this feeling like I'm going to have to work really hard. So, um, you know, I created my own path. I had a lot when I was growing up. I had a lot of experience going out into nature with my family. My father was obsessed with a native plant in California. We went to all the Western states in the middle of nowhere for hours and hours at a time, 10 plus hours, just with nothing to do. My sister and I got very good at, starting businesses, the Makery Bakery. We had several offerings. We had pricing differences. We were pioneers. I was a water dowser. I had many, careers even before I got out of the gate. And I think this also added to this sense of creativity and what I really hold so dear now, which is freedom. This thing that really allowed me to have the freedom to not feel as though if I wasn't, quote, a good student, could I actually, contribute and do something? And I think that creativity and freedom really also defined me.
That's great. It can be so demotivating and challenging to a child, right, when they're having difficulty in school or difficulty with standardized testing and things like that. But in your case, how did that really sort of propel you forward?
Yeah, I think it can go either way. When you start out of the gate feeling less than, it can limit you or it can kind of drive you. And I think in my case, I really sought to put myself in situations where I could have the experience of learning, right? Not necessarily the book learning, but I had my own house cleaning business at 14. I was a candy striper at Stanford University. I worked at the blood bank. I was a social health educator at my high school. I was definitely putting myself in the path of experiential learning, which I didn't even realize at the time. But it just was just one thing after another. What could I do to really create that path that I felt I wasn't going to get on a traditional path? Probably not. So, I think, my family immigrated from New Zealand in the mid 60s. My dad came to Stanford as a postdoc in Art Charlot's department. He was a brilliant physicist and a scientist, and he had a job where all he had to do is think about different problems and go to the lab and figure them out. And that's what he did over and over and over again. And I thought, wow, what a rebel! Doesn't have to listen to anybody else and can really do his thing. My mom was an entrepreneur, had her own business, and I think that really just gave me that sense of freedom. And I think that I had an urgency around that, kind of an urgency to learn, which is a little bit counterintuitive for someone who felt that they weren't learning enough. And I guess my high school quote in the yearbook was something like, it was actually a song with no name. Tune me into the wild side of life. I'm an innocent young child, sharp as a knife. Take me to the garrets where the artists have died. Show me the courtrooms where the judges have lied. And that was really kind of, this urgency to get out in the world and do that. And later in undergrad, I did, wrote grants. I worked in the San Francisco jail as a social worker. I really, I tried to put myself in the path of learning.
I wish we had the yearbook picture to go with that quote. That would be outstanding. Next time we'll get that. So you definitely, have said you're someone who didn't plan your career. So, sort of what drove your path?
I felt like, as I was saying, I really wanted to get out into the world. And I had never really experienced mentorship, but mentorship was the catalyst for me. So I didn't sit down and say, where am I going to go to school and how am I, I want to be a doctor. I want to be, I didn't feel like those things were in my grasp. And so I did work very hard, and I went to night school all through my experience. So I really had to fit that in. And when I was in undergrad, I had a professor who we were taking pre-law classes. So he was teaching constitutional law, and I thought it was really interesting. I had an interest in social justice. He also taught criminal law, and he would get up in front of the class and tell stories. He would read his own stories. He was very strict, and he would use a Socratic method on us and grill us. And for me, I felt almost in my element. Wait, I can argue this way, but then I can also take this perspective, and I can see this as an entirety. That I'm really liking that. And he said to me at one point, and he'd get up and share his stories, and his stories were really from his heart. And for someone who was so accomplished and so, I really looked up to him. He would take moments in class and sometimes read something very powerful that he'd written, and then close his book and walk out. Kind of. But he said to me, what do you think about going to law school? Oh, no, actually, he said, you should go to law school and I will help you. And he was my first mentor, Jack Curtin. He was incredible. And so I really feel that is where I started my path with that experience. That path changed. So, I was definitely on a course. I was, set, going to school, getting ready to graduate. I was working as, in a job I had kind of created, which was working at the U.S. District Court, pro se habeas law clerk. I was doing research. I was working on trials, that kind of thing. And, I had an experience going to work one morning, and I was violently attacked and was really thrown off my path. I ended up, not being able to take the course I had charted for a variety of reasons, including, severe PTSD, and ended up kind of just, retreating a little bit. Moved back to the peninsula. Really had kind of had this vision in mind for my career, and it did not go the way that I had predicted, for sure.
And your sister still steered you toward healthcare, is that right?
Right. So I was, it was interesting. I definitely felt like I was just not going to let that affect me. What had happened to me? Oh, that's not going to affect me. I'm just going to barrel back into the next step. And I always feel I take a little bit of a risk telling that story, because people say, well, why is that so relevant, to your path? But it changed the course of my career. And so in some respects, it's one of the most important things that I can tell. In others, maybe it's not as relevant, but for a story such as this, it does. And my sister was there, and she said, well, she was working at SIVA. She had worked at College and Corp. She was in kind of the Bay Area ecosystem, and she had worked for an entrepreneur who was a serial entrepreneur. And she introduced us and said, you should, they need someone. My sister's an attorney. You should meet. That was Vitamed. And I worked for a CEO named Stu Edwards. He was an incredibly prolific inventor. He had hundreds of patents. He was a character, for sure. And I really dug in there, and I got to learn all of the aspects of a startup business. I learned manufacturing quality. I was corporate counsel. The company was taken public. I really understood. I started to understand the genesis of what I'd call my patent advocacy, or my innovation advocacy, which was really that at that time, the patents were very disconnected from the business. And I came in and I really understood that abstract picture, that nonlinear course, that, the types of things that I felt were my weaknesses really came into picture for me. I could take ambiguity. I could take something that was almost impossible, and I could go and get a patent claim. I really felt empowered there. And I had incredible mentorship from Harold Hobach, Jim Garriak, other patent attorneys in the space who were just incredible, and they shaped my course very much.
So 2 quick sidebar questions, one funny and one serious. There was one I remember hearing of your nemesis patent.
Yes, my nemesis patent. So I'm at Vitamed. Vitamed is doing prostate ablation with RF, so a catheter with RF for prostate ablation for BPH, which is a funny story I later told a colleague. I don't know about going into BPH, and that became the attract, so it's kind of funny. Anyway, so we were using RF ablation, and I was trying to get a patent. It was very important. We'd been back to the patent office many times, and those times you went back, you argued with the examiner. And I had a nemesis patent that kept coming up with the X reference, you can't get a patent. And I'm like, what is this patent? And I'd heard that it was from Pfizer Strategic Innovation Group, and it was the Mac-hour patent. And so one time, it was an entrepreneur coming to visit, and they wanted to come and see. There weren't that many startups in the Valley at the time. This is about 1993, 94. And I heard, we were meeting in Innovator, and I walked through the double doors down 1380 Willow Road, and I'm like, you are Josh Mac-hour? I have words with you. Okay, I know you just started a new business. He just started the first Explorer Med company. And I said, you are my nemesis. You have made my life miserable. I have done so much to work around your patent, and that didn't even become a device. And I later worked for Josh at Transvascular, and
All right, and then circling it back around to the mentorship piece. In one of our conversations, or one of the things that we talked about, you'd mentioned Harold Hobach being one of your early mentors. And you had said that Harold taught you instead of making you wrong, which you found powerful. And I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, Harold and I mean, he wrote a lot of the ACS patents. I mean, he was just a patent attorney of great import in our space. He would have, he had a way of doing things. He was very senior. He had, the law firm was named after him, and I was essentially constantly arguing with him. And I would be like, I don't think so, Harold. I think we can get broader claims. Why are you putting this in the claim? Take that out. You don't. And we had this kind of, well, Angela, he tell me, that's the way that the examiner wants to see it. I said, yeah, but that's not going to make it relevant. We're going to have a problem with, and he really had this capacity to just take all of my quote criticism and never say, you don't know what you're doing. He worked with me, and it was incredibly powerful.
Great, thank you. So without a background that others might consider typical in healthcare, what do you think drove your early success?
It's I think there's a sense of resilience where you just dive deeply into problems. You kind of dive head first. And so I was interested in working in the industry where things were about to go wrong, bet the company issues, problems with patents. I didn't shy away from that. I never asked, what's this going to be for my career? How am I going to be successful at this? I asked, can I do anything to make sure this company survives? Can I get in at a point at where there's a problem and really solve it? And an example of that was I was at Vitamed, and Alan Will was interviewing for the CEO role at that point as we were going public. And I told him everything I did there. I told him about the patent strategies and the licensing work and some of the litigation we'd had to deal with. And he said to me, literally 2 weeks later, he said, whatever you're doing there, will you come to this company I'm starting with Dr. Fogarty and do it here? And I was like, oh, wow, what's the job? He's like, I don't really care. Whatever it is you're doing, come and do that here. And I got very excited about that. And he said, by the way, we're in kind of a tough situation with a company that's interested in acquiring us, but we have a patent issue that's really going to block it. And so I, of course, was not going, gosh, well, the company might fail. I was like, sign me up now. Like, let me go. And so I dove into that issue. 30 days later, I was presenting to Medtronic. I'd done kind of a full-on, you'll laugh now with no internet. Back then, you really had to dig deeply to find prior art, and you have to dig deeply to find things that might invalidate a patent. And I did that. The acquisition was successful. And I think I learned there, multiple things. One, I had a significant skill that was making a difference. And I also learned the value, once again, of the mentorship role. And Alan was someone who not only had high standards and was incredibly good at what he did, strategic, was able to, to question the right things, to be creative from a regulatory standpoint, but he also was so connected to the mission of the patient and his employees. And when someone gives you an opportunity like that, and they give you cover to take risks and just go for something, it's rare, and I think it makes you feel unstoppable. And that was, that was really that experience there.
So let's talk about your perspective on innovation. I think your entree into healthcare through intellectual property provided you with a really unique point of view on, technology, innovation, and problem solving. So tell us a little bit about that.
Gosh, I've been so incredibly lucky. I guess I would view myself as an innovation advocate. I feel advocacy is important, not only for a company or a business, but also for what's important to a business. And I've been at the table in the room for so many inventions. I actually used to carry a notebook around where I took a lot of my business notes. But every time I would hear something I thought might be patentable, I would write it down with a little icon of a light bulb. And literally, I must have 50 of these notebooks, and I'd probably go back and look through them. It would be interesting. But to me, I think that because I was really allowed to be a student of innovation, I could really recognize it. I could really understand how to go and get and relate the idea to the patent, to the protection that was necessary to get. What claim could we get for that? How could we do it? What was the prior art? I had mass universes of all the stents in the world back in the 90s when that was, people were infringing other people's patents potentially, and we had to find a path. And again, this ability to look at something all at once and have it make sense to me and be able to break it down in a way that was digestible to others was really something that I became really good at. And I was also I was probably an initial, bringing the patents into the company, getting the engineers involved, making everybody own the innovation process and recognize it when it happened was incredibly powerful. And, an example that comes to mind, a couple of examples. One was, I was very curious at the stent graft company. It was a aortic stent graft. Anurex was the name, and I said to Dr. Fogarty, "Gosh, I'd really like to understand about this innovation." And he said, "Well, come to surgery, and you can kind of see an open case." And so I went and I stood behind Tom for 9 hours on a very little stool, and he performed an open AAA surgery, which included iliac involvement and hypogastric involvement. In the aneurysm kept extending down, and so we were there for 9 or maybe 9 hours, and it was an incredible experience. But it also showed me firsthand kind of the practical reality of someone dealing with a disease like that could be unpredictable. Once he got in there, he realized there was more to the story, and how this modular stent graft, where you could take a surgeon who was used to having open access to all of the disease and put their hands on it to heal it, that if you used a catheter and you had to get out of trouble and you found something, you had to stent that other artery, or you had to stent lower in the iliac bifurcation, that you could do it with these cuffs that were created. And that was just, that was a moment where the problem and the solution came together like this, and we were able to get incredible coverage over that because it was such a novel perspective, and that was really the surgeon innovator reaching in to make that happen. And I think that when we started ForSight, I was at the Foundry with Hanson Gifford and Mark Deem, and another surgeon, Dr. Jean Dewan, who became my partner at ForSight Labs, walked in the door and essentially said, I'm an innovator and I'm a surgeon. And I was kind of like, yeah, I get you, let's. And that was another example of just really, he would sit down. He taught me what was probably 35 years of his experience in retinal surgery. He was a retinal surgeon. And all these ideas he had, and as he would tell it, I would go home that next night, search them, tell him like, not so novel, let's go. Not so interesting, someone's already done that. And he would come back the next day and really kind of work this process of really coming to that key novelty, that key innovation, and really pushing people. And I have participated in innovation, but I have in large part more facilitated innovation, I think, in ways that were really driven by just kind of an intensity around patents. And I was known for being very passionate about patents. Like, you think patent, I just would say they are one of the most important things you will have in your company. They are make or break, and they will get your innovation to a patient.
That's awesome. So as your stories are demonstrating, you've really had the chance to work with some of the best leaders in our field over the years, including one, who we haven't directly mentioned yet in the interview, which is the late, great Farrelyn Powell. And so when Farrelyn was CEO of eValve, you joined the company as consulting technology counsel to help with some of their early patent work. And during that time, it sounds like you've forged a very special and very strong connection with her. So when she passed away unexpectedly, you played a key role with her other friends and family in launching the Farrelyn Fellowship, which Kate mentioned. So now you're both a founder and host mentor of that program, which is all focused on, supporting and developing sort of future leaders in healthcare. And the thing that's interesting is this notion of grounding that experience on this authentic leadership imperative. Love to hear more about that.
Yeah, we came up with, the fellowship is an incredible, it's an incredible endeavor, and there's so many people behind it. And my co-host mentors, Claudia Carasso, Karen Long, and the previous host mentors, including Kate Garrett, really, we came up with that phraseology in a very simple way, that we believe that it's imperative to stress authentic leadership, not just a nice to have. It's an imperative. And I think it's an imperative not only in terms of the impact we can make on people, but also how we push and have successful innovation, and also in business negotiations, and there are some examples of that are interesting to talk about. I think the path is really kind of, how do you take those threads of your life and bring them forward, including revealing your struggles, and how do you kind of apply that in a way where there isn't a barrier to what you want to achieve? So you kind of, the noise goes down, authenticity goes high. I think it reduces barriers to innovation, to pushing companies forward, and just in general. And so the idea that we would make a statement like, we're going to do a 12-month program intensely, we walk with you as a host mentor, you're within context, you're having an issue, you text us, you can have that mentorship with you, and we will change your life. And of course, originally people were like, do you really want to say that? do you even want to say you're going to change someone's life? It's a little much. And I said, yeah, it is a lot, but I knew it was possible. And so we decided that's what we'd say. And it has actually changed my life, maybe more even than the fellows. But, you know, I think Farrellyn was someone who, she just had a trajectory. She was a problem solver. We were very different. She was very linear. She took a problem, she would really solve it. I was more abstract. We would have wonderful conversations. She was the first person that got up in front of a group, and it was a CEO panel we were on. You know, we're going to talk about CEO-isms, and she said, "I'm learning how to lead with my heart." And I really, that moment, I said, wow, it's possible. That's possible. And I'm famous for telling a story where when I started as a CEO, I took my team off site and said, I'm highly empathic, and I'm going to work on it. This is not going to get in the way of me being a leader. You know, I'm going to focus on the spreadsheets, and I'm going to be okay. Don't worry about me. I'm just going to disclaim this empathic side I have. And of course, full circle, you know, coming to realize that is a power I can't, you know, I can't get out of having that. So, you know, just a little bit on leadership, and that is, you know, I didn't, you know, in the spirit of transparency, you know, I didn't just kind of embrace that empathic side and then go on to my merry way to multiple acquisitions and success. I felt like it was a risk. And so I didn't trust it. So in the early days of ForSight and through multiple of the companies, you know, I definitely had more of a style of, okay, I need to control the situation. I need to figure this out. I can't let this get out of control. I need to make sure that I'm doing this, you know, correctly. And, you know, I definitely was thinking more along the lines of control. I think I had some ego come into the picture. You know, I've had some success. I know what I'm doing. And I think we'd started the fifth company. I'd run the third company. I was running the fourth company, and they were asking me if I could step in and run the fifth company. And Jean came in one day and said, I've got a great idea for another company. And I said, there's no way. There's no way we can start another company. We've got the first company still going. We've got the fourth company that's you know, is an implant. It was a very significant technology. We've got a fifth company going. I'm being asked, you know, I've been running this company. I've been asking. I basically said, no, this isn't the right thing to do for our investors. You know, we really have to land the planes, you know, et cetera. And we had a struggle about it. And I went home that night, and we were going to have lunch the next day. And I was thinking, like, you know, I know what I'm doing. I understand the model, how we're doing this, and what the investors will think, or, you know, I understand this. And, you know, he just wants more because he loves to invent. And, you know, and I woke up the next morning and I said, oh my goodness, I'm going to go to this lunch. I've got way too much self-importance, way too much like that I am the crux of all of this and that I should be listened to. And I went to lunch with him, and I said, Gene, I understand by saying no to starting another company, it was like kind of crushing his soul a little bit. You know, it was saying no to something that was very important to him, whereas I wanted what was important to me, which was, you know, let's land these planes. And behind it was, I felt that I wasn't going to be able to contribute to that next company. I'm not going to be able to be the CEO. I'm not going to be able to contribute. What am I? I'm not going. I won't have an operating role. I barely have time to do what I'm doing. I said, but I want you to do it, and I don't want to stand in the way of that. And I felt like maybe this was it for ForSight, because, you know, I didn't know what was going to happen. This was the sixth company we would have started, and I thought, well, that's a good run, 5 companies. And he looked at me with such just thanks, such grace, such gratitude. It was hard to describe. And he said, "You're my partner. Thank you." And he proceeded to just give me the same amount of equity he had and basically say, "Help me when you can." And I learned a lot about just how that humility felt when I woke up that morning and said, I'm kind of in my own way with the situation. I am letting kind of my kind of control side come out, and just really that humility moment was something that felt better than anything I've experienced, almost even in selling a company. I mean, it's that's a success metric. This was a personal moment where I said, this is the right way, the right thing to do.
Great, thank you. So as Kate noted, we want to leave lots of time for questions. And so everyone start thinking of your questions for Angela as I sort of ask our last formal question here. So you've had this tremendous career, with these 8 companies through ForSight alone, right? Your latest role is as CEO of Perceive Biotherapeutics, which, as Kate noted, has just closed a $78 million Series B. So this will be a 2-part question. Part 1, what excites you most about this latest venture?
So Perceive Bio is probably the biggest, most impactful effort I've ever entered into, because it's taking what I'd call life's work of some incredible innovators and scientists in the ophthalmic space, both looking at protecting from cell death in the retinal ganglion cells for glaucoma and protecting cell death of the retinal pigment epithelium for AMD. The first program is delivered via a gene therapy, and the second program is a differentiated delivery modality, of which we have some experience on. And so what excites me most is that not even big companies could do this. And when Jean said, I really want to change the world in retina, I want to have the potential in my lifetime to maybe even cure a disease, will you run this company? And I really didn't want to. I was a little burned out, frankly, but I have to say, I took the challenge and I said, yes, I will do that. And it's incredibly exciting, because these are the types of things in medicine that need to be done. We're not treating symptoms necessarily. We're going for the genetic drivers in disease. And so I think that's what's super exciting, is that it's a really huge mission.
And so what have been some of your learnings at the helm of this most recent company?
Well, during the fundraising, I have to say, it's the biggest opportunity I've ever been involved in. It also is going to require the most money, and that was a little bit daunting. So back in the beginning of 2022, we were getting ready to go fundraise, and of course, in 2022, you could say it was a bad time. Of course, now maybe it pales in comparison to that. But I was just kind of. I was thinking about going out and raising the round. I had some concerns, and one of my Farrelline fellows was also raising money, and she said, should I be afraid of the market and kind of the environment right now, going out raising money? And I told her, absolutely not. I really believed in her. I said, you shouldn't be afraid at all. Went home, realized I was afraid. And I remember this. I remember saying, this is one of the biggest things. This is a hard time to raise money. You're raising more money than you've ever actually in a total that's been totally raised for a company. I think $30 million was the most we'd ever raised at a ForSight company prior to exit. And I realized I was afraid. And I really had a conscious moment where I said, I'm just going to let that go. And I just relied on my team, an incredible team. I have a co-founder, a president of the company, who is a CEO in her own right, and Ruben. We raised the money together. It was an incredible experience. And I think what I learned from that and what I continue to learn is not so much new things, but to apply the things you already know. Listen better, let go of ego, really, focus on what matters. So I think it's maybe, I think, relearning or just really practicing those things in a consistent way. And I guess I'd say that, and maybe we just leave on this note, that is a theme. I mean, somebody said to me recently, they said, we were doing a values brainstorm for the company, and we were talking about, what are the things that are transformational. And we did a brainstorm with Post-its all over the walls, and what was important in the company. And somebody wrote very clearly on a Post-it, "Don't be afraid." And I would just leave you with that.
Well, you're not done yet, because I'm sure there are some great questions in the audience. Who wants to go first? All right, we'll go Denise first.
I also have a moving voice. I have a question about your transition, or maybe was it an event or a process? And how did it go in moving from a leadership style of I can control this, I can understand everything, to this totally different, right? Obviously awesome approach. Was it an event, a process, and what advice do you give to people who might be in the still in the control mode, which is common earlier in the career, right?
Yes, and it comes from such a good place. That's the problem. That's the issue about it, is it really comes from a good place that I might know best, or if I'm here and I can work on that, then I know it'll get done right. If that person needs my help, and I think at some point I started to view it as kind of blunting my team. I started to view it as a negative, like I'm telling someone I don't trust what they can do, and taking myself out of the equation, and really understanding that you have to let that go, and you can't do it all yourself. And I know people say that, but I think it was the sense of taking myself out of the picture and realizing that when I was doing that, I was potentially, holding someone else down. I was limiting them, just that I had felt limited in my life, and I was doing it to somebody else. It just didn't feel right. I think that we all know kind of in our hearts when this is happening a little bit, and it really is maybe not an event, Denise, but it's just like you really just have to pick up that learning, and you have to keep practicing it. It's very innate in people that either feel like they need to achieve, or they but I think you just really have to drop it, and pick up the trust.
The questions are coming in fast and furious online, so in person might have to step it up, or I'm gonna have the mic for a while.
No, go ahead.
Okay,
with one
all right, well, I'll
more.
go, and Angela, kind of following on that theme, this came in. What does it mean to let go of ego? And won't people see that as a lack of confidence?
Ooh, okay. I believe that there is something incredibly powerful in leadership, and it's something I call ease. And I don't believe that when you're in a control mode, or you're in a sense of needing to, fear something, that you have ease. I think ease comes from a sense of humility, and almost like not being able to control something, because you definitely are, number one, relying on others, and number two, you kind of give yourself that broader perspective. And I think ego comes from a really good place. I mean, for me, I was closing gaps, deficits I thought happened in my life. I wasn't, I wasn't learning the same way other people are. And then when I did understand how I could feature that, I got really confident, or I had an ease about jumping into situations that were, potentially over my head. So I think that it is self out, result, what do I want to achieve, result in? And it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And humility to me is that sense of ease, and that sense of ease is very powerful. And you can see this like you're negotiating for something, and you're kind of like you want to win a point or something, or think something's right, or and when you let that go, and you just literally have to say, if I let that go, what would happen? And many times when you let something go, you build trust in the other person, and then you actually are more powerful. And I've seen that happen.
Gentleman on the aisle.
Angela, a quick question about how do you select which startup project to work on, right? When you're starting off, you probably have a lot of opportunities in front of you. And how do you choose? I mean, there is the quantitative analysis piece. You can look at market size, patent value, all those kind of things. But when you kind of think about from a personal passion perspective, or your team and all those things, how do you kind of like decide which one to go after and which one to pass?
That is a great question, and it's a great process. We should actually be asking Hanson, who's sitting in the back. But what I learned from watching this process so many times is that it absolutely has to be the thing that you're passionate about. It absolutely has to solve a need that you actually have experience with or have seen the issue with. The armchair invention, where you're actually not there seeing the issue, and this is done a lot more. People going into surgery. I've watched multiple surgeries, open heart surgery. It has to be something where you're really solving a need. The market analysis and things like that, yes, fundability. I mean, the calculus there was never so strong as it really was the relevance and was this solving the need. And we would have kind of invent, ideas kind of neck and neck. Like we had the idea early on at ForSight to do the kind of what was a stent in the suprachoroidal space in the eye, which is a potential space, which I learned a lot about from Fogarty, working in the venous system and looking at peripheral vascular issues, et cetera. And that was really something that stuck out. I really thought that it had a reimbursable pathway potentially, but it was a very different approach. And it was just biologically very fascinating. Something very simple could create a biological effect that was very strong. So that was one that was kind of more intuitive, but at the same time, we also had something that was delivering drugs to the surface of the eye, just, bigger market, whatever. But we really just decided to go with the one where we thought that the regulatory path was a little bit more relevant, but we're passionate about both. And we started this second company a year or two later on the second idea. So we kind of didn't have to throw one away, so to speak. So that was really more in the incubator setting. Now with Perceive, I mean, really, I think the science behind something is incredibly important. And when you can follow the thread of the science very strongly and actually create a device or a drug or a therapeutic that can do that, I think that's also compelling. But I really think it is what you're passionate about and how you connect with that clinical need.
Back to the Zoomiverse.
Okay. Angela, I'm very impressed by your ability from an early age to push back, on the first CEO you worked for, from Dr. Jean Dewan. Have you always had that confidence and voice? And how would you encourage those who are less confident to speak up?
I did not speak very much when I was younger. I felt I didn't need to be heard or didn't have that confidence to be heard. So I think what's funny is people might think now that I have a voice and I've always had this voice, but I haven't. But I knew I had something to say. I just didn't have that physical embodiment of how to say it. And I think that came from actually being mentored in roles that were allowed me to ask incredible amount of questions and challenge. And so with Dr. Fogarty, for example, we got to go from a board meeting to a hardware store, and we got to find this, a special, Molly bolt that he's going to use and I was like, Tom, like, why, like, we're in this meeting, like, why is that happening? And and why are they making that, so that the MRI can read it, or the other, or like with this heart valve, why do you think, like, where are we going to get the Dacron from the, and just asking all these questions. He just entertaining that, giving me the space to be a questioner, kind of get my questions answered, allowed me to have a voice on a micro level, and that allowed me to grow my voice on a macro level. And so I think that the way I learned was different, and that gave me experiences that allowed my voice to grow. Mostly through kind of questioning, why? I don't understand. I don't agree.
That's great.
You mentioned, that's loud. You mentioned early on you had a value of freedom. I was wondering if you could say a little more about what that means to you and what your intended outcome is with that value.
Yes, for me, there's probably a lot of kind of innate things in that, in terms of being in nature, being free. For me now, and it's a personal value, and it's also a business value at ForSight and others. And I phrase it this way: I feel like when you are highly accountable to who you're either working with, or your employees, or you're true to in your personal relationships, you have kind of a freedom to change the world. You have a freedom to say what you think. So my freedom starts with humility and that kind of accountability. And then if I do that, I will have the freedom to do what I want. I mean, my path, I created jobs for myself. I mean, I was technology counsel for Dr. Thomas Fogarty. I created a judicial externship in pro se habeas law at United States District Court when there was no position like that. That's freedom. Freedom to create something that I was passionate about and see it like come into being. I view that as incredible freedom. And I only get that because I check the ego and I care about the result.
Kate, want one last one?
Oh, yeah. Angela, you've had a tremendously successful career, but have you ever had to deal with failure? And how did you navigate through that experience, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I feel like I definitely experienced a lot of failure when I was younger. I mean, I definitely did not feel that I was, going to be a success, so to speak. I think I've always wanted to, I don't know, failure, it's an interesting thing. I think I fail every day in certain respects. I fail to be humble. I fail to, kind of give everyone the benefit of the doubt, things like that. And I think I'm very aware of that. I think that I've worked with people who are just incredibly, that don't give up. And I think there's a sense of, failure is a sense of not giving up. So I feel like it's hard to kind of, I think the bottom line is I just don't feel defeated. I think that's the bottom line. And so, I mean, as I have a quick example, we have a company that was licensed out at ForSight and it did quite well. And I was ready to shut it down and just say it's over. And Gene wasn't. And we licensed it, and then we got it back, and he kept it going. And we're putting it back together, and it's going to be a success. And I kind of feel like that has really schooled me in kind of the not giving up, and also not feeling defeated or letting, quote, failure. I mean, I'm kind of struggling with that word a little bit, just because I feel like I've definitely seen a lot of it, but it hasn't kind of gotten under my skin, maybe.
Great. Well, we are just about at time here, but the fun part about being in my role is that I get to choose who gets the last question. And I'm choosing me. I just want to go back to mentorship because it has been so important to you in your career. We have a lot of aspiring innovators with us today. And, it's easy to want a mentor, but how do you find one and find one that's a good match for you? And then how, as a mentee, do you make the most of that relationship?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was working with Genentech and Vision Forward, we had a panel on mentorship, and we talked a little bit about it, and I learned a lot from that panel. And what we decided was it's not same. It's not you look like me, you are like me, I want you to mentor me. It's definitely not same. In my experience, I looked to figure out how could I solve a problem for this person? How can I be of use? How can I be useful to create that connection? And then the affinity that arises from that, when you are not focused on yourself and what you need and your career and getting advice, et cetera, but you're focused on how can I solve a problem for someone? How can I be in the flow of that experience and through that kind of building? Because that's really important. And also to kind of be on the lookout for it, because many times I feel like I didn't know mentorship was happening because it wasn't like in a structure, but I had such affinity for someone that would let me ask a question and not tell me I didn't know what I was talking about, because that was one of my fears, is that I would be viewed as not knowledgeable or not, asking a silly question. So when I got into situations where people answered questions that way, I knew I should follow that thread, because that was really the key. And I think mentees, it's really, bring the questions, bring the passion, I got into a jam, I think I screwed something up. Bring that, because mentors want to help with that. They don't necessarily want to give career advice, but if you say, look, the Kindle, like, I locked my keys in my car, like, okay, I'm there to help you. So it really is that, that's really what creates those relationships, is bring the energy around the curiosity and solving the problems. And the reciprocity of that is that a mentor is someone who wants to help solve problems for you. So it's you solve problems, you'll have the same. But bring your problems. Don't bring your resume or your next logical step in your career. Bring your problems.
Well, a lot of good advice in there too for mentors. So thank you. All right, so we are going to go continue this conversation over some drinks and snacks in the biodesign space. I hope you're all planning to join us. But first, please join me in thanking Angela for this incredible conversation.